O'Reilly. Are your wiper blades chattering, skipping, or squeaking? Don't let streaks or smearing on your windshield compromise your visibility. When it's time to replace your wiper blades, stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts and see our selection. Our professional parts people will even install your new wiper blades while you wait. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.
Oh, hey, everybody. Episode 84 of THC. I just messed up the intro twice. First, I said this was the Meat Eater podcast. And then I said, oh, hey, dude. Oh, hey, man. I'm getting progressively better and worse at the same time, I feel. Anyway, this is episode 84. It's a good one. It's about snakes. Most of it's about snakes, at least. We had Harry W. Greene, who is a herpetologist, the first herpetologist ever on the show, and he will not be the last. He is an interesting gentleman. He's a professor and many other things which you'll hear about in the interview. So stick around to learn about snakes and also his book, which is one of the better books I've ever read. Hopefully you check that out and pick it up. And I went on a little bit of a rant, which you'll hear soon. A little bit of a rant. So there's a rant about drawing the line. And then we have, of course, another not so sharp moment. That's pretty damn good. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you guys about Meat Eater Season 8. Meat Eater Season 8 is now on Netflix. You guys know about Netflix. I remember when Netflix was just where you had to get a CD out of it mailed you a CD. Or DVD is probably what that was. They mail you a DVD, and then you had to mail it back to them or whatever. That was not so long ago. But now it's a juggernaut. It's the juggernaut platform that brings you many, many, many good content projects. Paramount among them is Meat Eater Season 8. It's an 8-episode season. Includes lots of really cool things that are near and dear to my heart. Mexico Coues deer. Maryland Sika deer. Maryland one, of course, is very near and dear to my heart because that's my home territory. So I'm glad we went there. But you can go right now to Netflix and binge to your heart's desire with Steve Rinella, Ryan Callahan, Giannis Patelis, the whole crew out there doing fun stuff and eating. So Netflix, Meat Eater Season 8, check it out. Proud of the team for doing awesome work on this one. So go binge or don't. Whatever you want to do. It's a free country. Now, if you go to firstlight.com as we speak, you're going to learn about the Brookstown sweater. We've talked about the Brookstown sweater here before. Brookstown sweater is my favorite, probably my favorite piece of cold weather gear from First Light. In fact, I have one, and my wife, who's pregnant, wears it all the time. She thinks it looks fashionable. It's only about 10.9 ounces. It's ultralight. It's highly packable. It's perfect insulation. It's got 100 grams of DWR treated, 800 fill, 37.5 down tech. It's advanced active insulation. I actually wore it on an elk hunt where it was warm in the morning and a snowstorm blew in. I wore it in the hike in, and I wore it for sitting in glassing for elk. So I mean, it's a durable piece. It's a lot of duality. You can wear it pretty much anytime you need insulation. So go check out the Brookstown sweater, firstlight.com. Okay, here's episode 84 coming at you. Let's go.
I guess I grew up on an old dirt road. A pedal to the metal, always did what I was told. Till I found out that my brand new clothes came secondhand from the rich kids next door. When I grew up fast, I guess I grew up mean. There's 1,000 things inside my head I wish I ain't seen. And now I just wander through a real bad dream, or feeling like I'm coming apart at the seams. But thank you, Jack Daniels, oh, number 7.
Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 84. I'm Ben O'Brien. Say hi, Phil.
Hello.
Phil, you were just mentioning that you're going through a bit of a attitude adjustment here recently.
Yeah, well, I feel like I have to stick up for myself. To you, and also the people, the THC listeners who are writing in with, frankly, just rude names for a mustache they haven't even seen yet.
They haven't even seen this mustache. It's looking better. It's looking better.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's kind of like a Henry Beauregard mustache now.
The main problem is the color.
Yes.
So you
can get
the
that
thickness.
Best for men or whatever.
Yeah.
Hair gel.
One of those comb-in coloring dye things.
Next thing you know, you're Phil from the TV, Dr. Phil.
Yeah, I'm looking more. I'm more of a mustache man than Ryan Callahan.
Yep.
I will define the mustache for this company
and the generation.
The generation, yeah, that's what I strive for.
So anyway, a lot of you guys have wrote in with like name Phil's mustache, and most of them are mean. Mm-hmm. And so we're fighting back. I'm on Phil's side.
Hey, thanks. Yeah. It's first time for everything, I guess.
Yeah, I'm on Phil's side. Stop saying offensive names about his mustache, even though a lot of them are pretty funny.
Sure, I guess.
Anyway, mustache. What's a Movember?
Yeah, that's coming up soon.
So are you going to keep it for that?
No, I think November 1st. It's
off and gone.
It's gone.
All right. Well,
I keep touching it and pulling at it. It's a problem.
Well, get your mustache names in now, because we're not having this anymore. Make them nice, polite mustache names. You bastards. All right, we got some things to address here, but today's guest is Harry W. Greene, a wonderful man, a professor for a very long time, and a herpetologist. Phil, do you know what herpetologist is?
Vaguely, because I've been mixing the podcast, but I would not be able to define it for you right now.
Let's define. A herpetologist is someone who specializes in the study of reptiles and amphibians. If it slithers around, herpetologist is into it. But Harry, who we had a great conversation. We're going to keep this intro segment short because I want to get pretty much directly to the conversation with Harry, because I think it's one of the best. And his books, particularly his book you'll hear about in the interview is one of the best I've ever read, I would say. I mean, it's just a great, as he calls it, an eccentric meditation on the outdoors. And it's great. So you'll hear about that coming up. But we got a couple things to cover off on from previous podcasts, and then we'll get to it. But snakes, Phil, are you afraid of snakes, Phil?
No, not particularly, unless they're kind of exotic looking and move quickly.
Do you have any stories about snakes where you had any close run-ins, or have you been fairly...
No, nothing dangerous. No, I've never come across a rattlesnake in the wild, but I used to catch little garter snakes in my backyard, and they did the whole thing at school. We had a wildlife assembly, and you got to hold a boa constrictor, and I was into that. So, no, I don't have like a physical horrific reaction.
Well, I don't either. I'm not into them. I don't want them to be crawling around wherever I am, but I don't fear them at all.
Yeah.
But it turns out, Phil, that that fear of snakes is one of the most common phobias in all of humanity.
That tracks. That makes sense.
And you're going to hear from Harry Greene why he thinks that's true. But a lot of studies will back this up, and it's just because, and again, Harry goes into this in some detail, but it's because we've been around them for so long. They were on the savannas of Africa when we were becoming, if you believe in all of this, becoming lower hominids and turning into humans that we are today. And so there's just a lot of history with snakes. So it's interesting to learn about them. It's interesting, and they're just interesting animals. They slither, not like many other beings that you'll run into. So they're just an interesting creature. I think we're all interested in them. There's some people, Annie Razor, who's been on this podcast before talking about Game of Thrones, wouldn't even be in the podcast room, wouldn't even be in the office if we had a snake in here.
No, I honestly couldn't believe her reaction when we just started talking about snakes.
She was like, nope, I don't want to hear the word
nope,
snake.
Stop it.
I don't want to think about snakes.
She was like, and honestly, if you're thinking about bringing a snake into this office, you should really let people know so they have a chance to not be here. And I think she was talking about herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So throughout evolutionary history, we have learned to fear snakes, and it has manifested itself in different ways. Annie is an extreme example. Couldn't even get her in the podcast studio to talk about snakes. So that's that. So we're going to talk about that with Harry W. Greene in just a moment. But we got a bunch of emails. Thanks for everybody that's been writing into thc@themeateater.com with both your not-so-sharp moments, your names for Phil's mustache, and just your general musings about the show. There's been lots and lots of good emails. It's hard to keep up, so if I haven't emailed you back, I'm sorry, but I will get to it. I'm just happy to see everybody with feelings one way or the other about the show. I got one from Brandon Hill that I wanted to read. That's really, really interesting. I won't read the whole thing, but he basically just says, you've mentioned many times about finding common ground and striving to not upset each other. I think the one thing you haven't addressed is where we draw the line. I get it. There's no reason to intentionally rub our grip and grin pics in the faces of anti-hunters and vegans. We shouldn't go out of our way to be assholes to those that are offended by what we love to do. But what is wrong with being proud of your accomplishments and wanting to share with your family and friends? When do we say to our opposition, you know what? Enough is enough. This is what I do. This is my lifestyle. I'm proud, and I don't give a shit about your hurt feelings. You've suggested we should always be open and evaluate and compromise our values. I disagree. There's become a point where we put our foot down and yield no more. Otherwise, we will slowly be bullied into the end of that which we hold so dear. That was pretty well stated. There's a couple things.
I think that goes back to the grip and grins conversation we had yesterday, or last week, I mean.
And it goes to last week's grip and grin conversation. It goes to the bear conversation with Barry Gilbert. It goes all the way back to going to Berkeley and talking to vegans and animal rights activists. There's a couple things that Brandon says that just aren't, I think if you would go back and listen to my comments, that just I think aren't, that don't track with my views. And I've said this many, many times. There's some things that I will not bend on. There's some things that I believe to be true, and I'm not going to bend on doing them, talking about them, promoting them, whatever they might be. Certainly gun rights is one of those things I believe in the Second Amendment. But it's not that I wouldn't have a conversation with somebody that doesn't believe in the Second Amendment, and I'm not going to tell them within that conversation, hey, be quiet, I don't agree with you. And so I think Brandon, thanks for writing in, Brandon, and I appreciate it, but I think what you're saying there is I just think it's wrong. I don't agree. And the reason I don't agree is within the conversation. I can have strongly held beliefs, but if I'm going to approach a conversation by saying, like, enough is enough, I don't want to talk to you about this, I don't care what you think, is basically what you're saying about, I don't give a shit about your hurt feelings. Just basically saying, I don't care what you think. This is not the way that I go about things. There's some things that I'm not going to move on. When I talk to Barry Gilbert, I wouldn't be like, you know what, the North American model of conservation, yeah, that's fine. It might suck. But, like, I'll address the reality that it's not perfect, but I'm not going to budge on the fact that I think it's a prescription for better wildlife and better conservation in this country. And so I don't mistake, if you're out there listening, don't mistake me for some kind of pushover snowflake. Just don't do that, because that's not the case. I am, the willingness to have a conversation in the modern sense does not mean that you're going to fold to every push against your ideologies. It doesn't. But it means you're open to new ideas. And being open to new ideas doesn't mean you have to sacrifice the ones you believe in. And so we can do both things at the same time, and we should do both things at the same time. So if the question is, where do I draw the line? I don't have a line. I'll talk to anyone about anything at any time. And there's no line that I have to draw about my beliefs. Now, like I said, there's certainly beliefs that I hold that I think that would be almost impossible for somebody to talk me off of. Like, hunting is valuable for wildlife, for humankind, and for all of us. It's going to be hard to get me off of that one. but I certainly let somebody try. And I'll certainly, if someone makes a good point, I'll certainly think about it. And if I feel the need to adjust my ideologies or my beliefs on something, then I will. And so in this the pushback on liberals to say that, you're a snowflake if you bend to what somebody thinks. Yeah, fine. I think the outrage machine in this country is a bit off the rails. I think people are trained that they can get what they want through outrage, and we are developing internet mobs, and we're not really understanding how they've come together or what they can do. I think we're babies when it comes to social media and the internet, and we're learning. But all of that is to say, I don't have a line. Where do I draw the line? I don't really care. There's no line. There's no person that could sit in this room that I wouldn't talk to. There just isn't. There's plenty of people that I can think of that I could talk to, and then I know we probably wouldn't come to any agreement, but I'd want to talk to them anyway. Because understanding the other side of an issue is as important as your own beliefs, in my opinion. So maybe that puts me directly in the crosshairs of people that think they should be proud about their beliefs and shout them from the rooftops. I guess if you listen to this, you know that I do too. But I don't sacrifice anything because of that within a conversation. So that's what I believe. What do you think about all that, Phil? That was a bit of a rant. But I deserve a rant every once in a while.
It's been a while since
I haven't ranted in a while.
No.
Yeah, so I deserve a rant.
Sure.
Every once in a while.
It's your show. You deserve whatever you want.
What do you feel like? Do you feel like you're learning anything from sitting in here and all these conversations?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just entrenched in a bunch of stuff that I had never really thought about before working here. So it's been. That's why I appreciate you, because you're just like coming from a fresh perspective on a lot of this stuff. Which, again, that's another point I'll make. People with fresh perspectives that aren't in your bubble, they're not in your echo chamber, are important. So, and people with hardened perspectives are important to have in your life that don't believe what you believe. I have lots of friends and family members that we do not believe the same things. We often argue about fairly important things. And my grandfather always said, don't bring sex, religion, or politics to the dinner table. I don't believe in that. I believe we should be able to have those constructive conversations about very important subjects without getting all spun up about them. Anyway, that's that. I was going to give a brief answer to that question, but I gave a long answer. So anyway, if you're listening to this and you just feel like I need to push back on some of these folks more, or that take harder stances on subjects here or there, I mean, I'm certainly going to be firm in the things I know to be true, but I'm also looking to be proven wrong at some level. I'm looking to test my ideas and make sure they're strong enough to last any battle, to last any debate, to last any argument. Because if my ideas aren't good enough to last in any conversation, then they're not good enough overall. So that's the way I think about it. Hopefully this show reflects that. And Brandon's comments weren't challenging to me, but it was a challenging question, something I thought about after I read it. And so I'm not going to be bullied by anybody out of my beliefs, but that doesn't mean I'm going to push them away if they start to bully me. So we'll see. We're going to continue still to get some challenging people in this room, talk to them about crazy stuff, and see where it goes. All right, we're going to move on. Think, Phil, or am I going to keep going? I think we should move on, unless you've got more to say. I thought you laid it all out there, though.
I laid it out. Here's another message I got from Jesse. He said, I got a real dilemma I think you folks could help me with. Here's the deal. A fella at my work died recently, and his memorial service is on rifle opener for elk. My freezer is getting pretty low, and I've got plans to be out at first light on opening day to replenish my supply of elk meat. I wasn't particularly close with the guy, but I did help him move a while back and met his family a time or two. I can't decide if I'd be an asshole for not going to the funeral. I'm a student, so I've really only got a few weekends to hunt, and even then my time is limited. What do you think? It's really been weighing on me, and I'm worried about what others around my shop will do if I don't go. Thanks for the great podcast, blah, blah, blah. This is a... Phil.
Yeah, you asking for
Dr. Phil?
For my opinion first?
I'll give mine first. I'll let you off the hook on that one.
Okay.
A guy died, man.
Thank you. That's my opinion
guy
as well.
died. He's dead. The man's got a family. He's got a family.
Yeah, I would say that'd be a tough look for you if you did not go to this memorial.
I mean, I get it. You're hedging. You're like, I only knew him a couple times, but he's dead, and he was a person yesterday. Today he's dead. You worked with him.
Helped him move?
That's close enough.
Yes.
Like, friend circle wise, helping someone move.
Oh yeah.
Phil's never helped me move.
Nope.
I've never helped Phil
And
move.
I wouldn't if you asked.
Yeah, I said, hey, Phil, help me move. No.
No.
But you'd come to my funeral, I bet.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, man, I hope the funeral probably already happened by the time you'll hear this, but I hope you went, Jesse.
Uh-huh. And if you didn't,
Firm
you're feeling
scolding.
real guilty right now.
Firm scolding. It's one of those things where if you have to ask yourself the question, you already know the answer.
You just don't want to hear
You already
it.
know the
You
answer.
don't want to hear someone else say
We've all had like a long distant aunt that died, and you just don't. You go to the funeral, but you don't go for the aunt. You go for the people that you know who knew the aunt. So like, just go and be happy about it. And if you need to borrow some meat from a friend, you'll probably find a friend. And if that friend dies, go to his funeral too.
Uh-huh.
Go to people's funerals.
Yep. And then during the service, you can sneak over to his house and take his meat out of the freezer.
Yeah.
He doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah. His family. Damn, Phil. Phil's going dark.
Spicy. It's getting spicy.
Phil's going full heel on us.
Yeah.
If you know what that
I've
means.
been the
you're a
villain
wrestling
all
fan.
along.
Yes.
You just
I like
didn't
Phil's
know it.
character turn. Anyway, go to the funeral, Jesse. For goodness sakes, man. I love hunting, and I love wild meats. That's all I talk about. But if a coworker died, anyone here at Meat Eater died, I would go to the funeral. Pretty much every time, even if it wasn't somebody that I was super close with. So I'll be there for you, Phil. If the worst happens.
Thank you.
If the worst happens, I'll be there.
But
for
you'd
you.
probably be standing, on the sidelines thinking about all the hunting you could be
Oh, of
getting
course,
in.
dude.
Yeah,
I might be
that's
watching.
fine.
I
That's
might be
fine.
watching hunting videos on my phone at your funeral,
Yes.
or I might be looking at Onyx Maps, trying to figure out like the quicker route in because I don't have as much time.
See, that would make it even more special, knowing how badly you didn't want to be there,
Yes.
but you were anyway.
I might go hunting in the morning because do people have funerals in the morning?
It's usually, I'd say, around lunch.
It's
like
lunch
time.
So I might find a
Yeah.
spot and I might go hunting in the morning, and then if I kill an elk, I wouldn't come. Wait, no, I would still come.
You should.
I just yelled at the guy. If I kill an elk, I would mark it. I would mark it as a waypoint, and then quickly go to the funeral, wash the blood. I'd probably wash the blood off. Quickly go to the funeral and then come back.
Yeah. Think how bad you'd feel if you went out and you didn't get anything, and you missed this guy's funeral for nothing.
Or what if you missed a giant bull at like 100 yards, and then that was the guy looking down at you saying,
Oh.
"Karma.
Yep.
Should have went to my funeral. Now you're feeling poorly on multiple levels." Anyway,
Go to the service.
go to the service, please. Lord, go to the service. Man's got to draw a line, Phil. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, now you have a line.
Draw a line.
This is the line right
This
here.
is where I draw the line. Man's got to draw the line. All right. Well, we're gonna get into something you all really love. We got a lot of not so sharp moments, Phil. A lot of them. Hundreds of them, in fact. So it's been hard for me to sift through them, but they've all been very entertaining. And we have a bit of an issue to discuss around last week's not so sharp moment presented by Work Sharp. There's a song. Are you aware of this, Phil? A song by a fella named Cord Lund called "My Truck Got Stuck."
Nope. Was not aware.
It is basically, if you listen to it, several people sent this to me. If you listen to it, it is basically the story that we read last week.
So what are you implying here?
I'm not implying anything. Many people implied it to me that we got duped.
Oh, okay. Well, I would tend to kind of be like my eyebrows would be raised, but I did go to Elliot's Instagram.
You did.
And I went all the way back, and he didn't post any photographic evidence of the trucks, but there is evidence of this event actually happening on his Instagram. He talked about it before, like months before he ever wrote into THC. So I don't think I don't think he would make up this story.
I trust Elliot. I defended Elliot in all the correspondence.
Okay, good.
I said
good,
Elliot
good.
is a stand-up individual. Here's the song. It's a nice tune.
I like it so far.
Old brown prairie that had been so dry for so long was very muddy.
See?
Very muddy.
Out and get another stuck in, and motors that roar and tires that spin and sink right down to the dip. And we'd all
Maybe it just inspired him in his prose.
Sure. Yes.
Anyway, we're on to you, Elliot.
Yeah. Well, he's in good company then.
Yeah.
He's not alone. Other people have had not so sharp moments.
Yeah, that's true. No,
Like
I
this
think
guy.
I think it's just a common thing that happens to you in Canada. Your trucks get stuck.
Uh-huh.
All the trucks get stuck in Canada.
Yeah. If you were to fly over in a helicopter and airplane, it's just a graveyard of trucks.
It's just
down
trucks
there.
everywhere. There's one front end loader just going around.
Yep.
Just endlessly.
It's the
pulling
same
them
guy.
around. Same
He's
fella.
been doing it for hundreds of years.
So anyway, I'm on the side of Elliot here. I don't think he embellished that at all. I think it was completely true. Because he stopped in the middle of the story to say, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's very true.
I know this sounds crazy,
But it's true.
but it's true.
All right, well, hit the jingle, Phil. We're up for the next not-so-sharp moment.
Work sharp, not so sharp moments, sharp so you don't have to be.
Okay, this one's from Cody Gardner. It says longtime THC listener. Cool. Appreciate it, Cody. He's got a not-so-sharp moment. We will begin. When I was a child, I saw a movie where a kid owned a raccoon as a pet. See where this one's going, Phil?
Is this Pocahontas?
I don't know. He doesn't mention the movie.
Okay.
It could be.
I can't think of any other movie.
Me either. That's a good pull.
Uh-huh.
Nice pull. I didn't even think of any of those types of movies. This inspired a dream of owning my own raccoon. How do you say raccoon? You say raccoon or raccoon?
I say raccoon.
Yeah, me too. I was trying to sauce it up there, and I said raccoon.
Raccoon.
One day, I asked a neighboring farmer for permission to go snag carp in an irrigation pond. I received permission to fish, but it came with a warning that at said pond there was a defensive raccoon that may have babies in a stack of pipe next to the pond. This,
I like this already.
Yeah, I know.
It's like a dragon guarding a tower with a princess.
this was my chance to fulfill my dream. I proceeded to investigate the suspect pipe. To my delight, saw staring back from one of the pipes a small set of eyes. I reeled my hook into the end of the pipe and thrust my pole.
Jesus.
And I gave it a twirl. And eagerly pulled my new best friend's tail first to the end of the pipe. At this moment, I was given the opportunity to make a better decision, but failed in the most epic fashion. The tail didn't look like I was expecting, so I decided to straddle the pipe, grab the tail with both hands, and lean over for closer inspection. The last thing I remember, as I focused into the darkness, straining my eyes and mouth agape, is the sight that wrenched dirty little Cheerio puckered in eyes that were poised to fire. What happened next still inspires nightmares. I was hit with a direct shot in the open mouth, up the nose, and in both eyes with the most vile substance in all of nature, skunk spray. See, there's a twist even.
That's good stuff.
I gasped in shock, filling both lungs to capacity with a half-atomized blasting steam of pure liquid terror, which sent me immediately retching to the ground, writhing in pain and feeling as though I had been gouged in both eyes with a glowing red fire poker. I could not see at all and was unable to open my eyes and take a full breath. Profuse vomiting quickly overtook me, and I truly feared for my life as I lay flailing in a mat of goat heads, wondering as a terrified child with little life experience, which failed attempt at breathing would be my last. A friend I had taken to fish with me grabbed me by my ankle and dragged me kicking and screaming between heaves through the mess of goat heads. My own bodily explosions went into the pond. He then proceeded what he referred to as help, but I would call it more like waterboarding. At this point, I was consistently sucking pond water with every plunge, and spewing my insides out every time I was jerked back to the surface by the fistful of hair he so persistently held.
Well, you probably would have preferred a dragon.
Yeah, I was again in legitimate fear of the end. I made it home eventually, and in a fitting end to the story, as I entered my home, still shaken by the near-death experience, the first words of compassion I heard from my father was a stern command to get out! I lived outside for a week until I became fit to be in the presence of others. But the shame, embarrassment, and chilling memory of this story still linger to this day.
Yes, that was a good one.
Again, play the jingle, Phil.
Work sharp, not so sharp moments, sharp so you don't have to be.
Thanks, Work Sharp. Cody, we're gonna send you. We should send you like a couple cans of tomato sauce or something.
Yeah, can of Febreze.
But we're gonna send you a Work Sharp field sharpener instead. Hopefully that makes this gruesome childhood memory all the better. Thanks for writing in. Everybody continue to write in at thc@themedia.com. Try to top Cody's story. Hopefully there's not a song about skunk spray somewhere that I don't know about.
Nope.
I'm assuming there isn't.
We're watching you, Cody.
But we're watching you, people.
Plagiarism's not good.
You got to draw a line somewhere. Now, Mr. Harry W. Greene, Colorado State University. Enjoy.
I guess I grew up on an older road, a pedal to the metal.
Harry, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Ben?
Oh,
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me here. I'm getting some deja vu going back to college.
Is that right?
It's a little late to our meeting, so I felt like I was late to class.
Did you walk across campus?
I did. Yeah. I didn't know where I was, much like college. I was lost, and then I had to find the building, so it really felt like I was back in my collegiate days. So we're here at Colorado State University, and I always like to have guests like describe their surroundings, but we're in your office.
Yep.
But kind of just describe how you came to be at Colorado State, because that's a long story, but the shorter version after your retirement.
Right. So I've been retired about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married to another biologist. She mainly studies frogs and the fungi that are killing frogs. I mainly study snakes. She's not retired yet, and she has some close collaborators here at Colorado State. So when she got a sabbatical leave, that's where we decided to come.
Yeah. So you were previously an East Coast dweller, as I was, and new to the West.
Yeah, although I grew up mostly in Texas, and then I worked in Berkeley for 20 years, so I really think of myself as a Westerner, and I think of Texas as my home, really.
Yeah.
I just happen to have a good job, and she has a good job in upstate New York, so.
So you're telling me about an elk hunt you got coming up, too.
Yeah, we're being guided. We're going to be taken up into the high country in northwestern Colorado this Friday for about, we don't know, probably 5 to 7 days.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, looking
Excited.
forward to
Friends, family, your wife's coming along, you told me?
She's as much a hunter as I am, so yeah.
That's awesome. I guess we should let people know. It struck me that I hadn't often heard the term herpetologist before reading some of your books and looking at some of your work. So can you explain what a herpetologist is?
A herpetologist is a person who studies amphibians and reptiles. That's the shortest possible answer. So there are lots of things about the biology of amphibians and reptiles. One might study how they eat, how they reproduce, where they're found, whether they're threats to their persistence in human-dominated landscapes. Those are all parts of herpetology.
Yeah.
And most herpetologists also have some more general specialties. So like I'm an ecologist and evolutionary biologist. I mostly study behavior.
Got it. And you've done some interesting studies of reptile behavior, specifically snakes, that I want to talk about. But I was reading your book, Tracks and Shadows, Field Biology as Art, and it is it's striking.
Thank you.
It's beautifully written. I will say I'm like 3/4 of the way through it, but from the very first chapter,
thank you so much. I'm glad. That's my goal.
Yes, you got me. And I feel like when you're reading something like that, I read a lot of like Aldo Leopold and some of your, what you call eccentric meditations on the kind of the natural world reminded me of Leopold or somebody kind of with that kind of profundity.
Oh, thanks.
With your experience. And so we should touch on that. But you start in that book and in the opening paragraphs talking about when you first became interested in the natural world as a kid on like a ranch in Texas.
Yeah.
And there's some lines in there you talk about kind of being just
intrigued about and asking questions. Can you give people an idea of that time in your life, like when you're asking, where are the ears on that turtle? Like those types of things.
Yeah. Well, it was actually a farm. My mom grew up in fairly extreme poverty in East Texas, outside a tiny town about 2 hours drive east of Dallas. Her father was a World War I veteran. They had 6 acres that Lola, his new teenage bride, had been given by her parents, and they had a plow horse, a Jersey cow for milk, a flock of chickens. They raised 1 pig a year. There's no electricity, no running water. Raised 1 pig a year, which you could only butcher in the winter because there was no refrigeration, so they had to wait for a really cold day. And my little brother and I, by then my mom had moved off, married my dad, who was an Air Force officer. So we traveled a lot, but we always came back to Grandpa's farm whenever we could. And so my little brother and I, as kids, didn't detect the poverty aspects of it. You know, we just detected that they lived close to the earth. And we watched what that meant. We knew where butter came from because my grandmother sat in the kitchen with a churn and a bag of milk, a cream, banging that pole up and down in that little ceramic churn, making butter. And we knew that poultry died for us to eat them for dinner because we watched my grandmother butcher the chickens. And one year we watched them butcher a pig, and we knew where milk came from because Grandpa tried to teach us how to milk the cow. And so I grew up with that, and from my earliest memories, I was always curious, and I mentioned in the book, once finding a box turtle and asking my mom where are its ears, looking at a pig being butchered and already knowing what an intestine was and seeing that's an intestine, So I grew up with a interest in natural history and in kinds of animals. My first taxonomic works were about how to tell Jerseys from Holsteins, from Angus and so forth.
Yeah, I mean it just feels, when I was reading that, it feels like there's certain kinds of upbringings that foster that feeling, right? That foster that closeness, like you're saying, to the closeness to the dirt, to the natural world.
Yep.
I would guess from reading your book that that's kind of what led you down the path that you've been on for the last 5-6 decades.
That's right. Right.
Do you have any other moments or stories you can tell people that kind of illustrate how you became to be so? You spent your life traveling the world looking for crazy reptiles and predators and things like that. You have amazing stories of pulling pythons by the tail and jaguars in Costa Rica and things like that. That I found interesting. All of that came from somewhere.
Yeah, and to some extent, I don't even know the answer. I mean, it was a sort of a love at first sight thing. My parents weren't what would be called naturalists today. In fact, at this point in my life, I'm really reflecting back on the fact that my mother wanted to escape that poverty, which I idolized as a little boy. I once asked my mother, Mom, why didn't you marry somebody like Grandpa so we could live on a farm? And my mother, I only late in her life sort of realized how desperately she worked to get out of that scene. So here I was idolizing something that, wasn't idolizable to her. But it did put me around animals. It got me to watching animals, and I loved it from the start. And I'll say this for my parents, their reaction was to buy me books.
Yeah.
So I had my first reptile book when I was 7 years old. And so there it was, What I didn't have was any inkling there was a career until I was 13 years old. My father was stationed for 1 year near Norman, Oklahoma, and he was taking classes at the University of Oklahoma. He came home one night and he said, "Son, I met this professor of zoology and he studies lizards, and he wants to talk to you." So the next day I rode my little 3-speed at that time bicycle down, and I met this guy, Charles Carpenter, and I came home that night and I said, "Boy, I'm going to be a university professor. They get to keep lizards." Because when I walked in his office, the thing that impressed me was he had these live lizards. He had a live possum living in a cage under his desk. And I thought, what could be better than this?
You're living the dream. You got possums in your office.
Yeah, that's right. And he got paid, And so that was what showed me there was a career path for me.
Yeah. And that there was other transformative part in your life. We'll hustle through this so we can get to all, we got a lot to cover. There's another point in life where you talk about being an ambulance driver. And being like an assistant mortician.
Yep.
All of these, I will say that all of these reflections that you make in your book kind of all lead to somewhere.
That's right.
Your hypothesis about the natural world and conservation, things like that. So I think that just so folks listening, we get there. I'm kind of excited to get there, so we're going to work through this. But you talk about how seeing, crying infants, like how seeing people die changed you at that early age, like it impacts you still today. Can you kind of describe that time in your life for folks?
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Yeah, it happened accidentally. I was such a nerd in high school. I published 3 scientific papers before I graduated from high school, but I hadn't had a date. And then I went off to college and I was like, whoa, there's a whole new world out here, And so that's why at the end of my junior year in college, I had a cumulative 1.89 GPA. That's a D+ average for 3 years of college, because I was having a really good time. And my father wasn't giving me a big enough allowance to have as good a time as I wanted to have. So I found out there was this job at the local tiny town funeral home, and it paid $60 a month, plus you got your room free. So I'd had a Boy Scout first aid class. I went down. Guy asked me if I had a black tie and a white shirt. And I said, yeah. And he goes, be back here at 1:00. You're hired. And the next thing I knew, I was loading a body out of a hospital bed onto a gurney. And long story short, for the next 3 years or so, first in this tiny Texas town and then in Fort Worth for a big ambulance company, I was an ambulance driver and ambulance medic before they were called EMTs. And this resulted in many, many, many encounters with violence and with illness, with tragic deaths, all of which I sort of almost always took in stride because I was brought up to just take things in stride. There were a couple of incidents that got me, but mostly I just took it in stride. And when I look back on it now, decades later, I think 2 things it did for me was impress me with how precious life is and how permanent death is. And the other thing was that this is in the late 60s. We couldn't do much in the ambulance. I was later an Army medic, and I could do a lot more things as a trained Army medic than I could do as a civilian ambulance driver. So I'm afraid we probably made mistakes sometimes. At the very least, we probably failed to do things that might have saved a few people. And that's haunting.
Yeah.
But as a conservation biologist today, I often think about that because I think the dilemma facing conservation biologists and people in general in terms of saving some section of biodiversity is kind of like that. We don't know everything we'd like to know. And so the easy way out would be to take no risks, because then you won't get criticized. I mean, I think our descendants may criticize us. Why did you let elephants go extinct on a global basis on your watch? So we might have great-grandchildren who will look back and wonder why.
Yeah, in that moment, yeah.
Yeah, they'll wonder why because we're both conservationists at some level. I know we are. So they might look back then. But right now, not taking risk is sort of the easy way out. Your peers won't jump on you because you proposed a kind of a crazy thing like Pleistocene rewilding and the possibility of putting surrogate mammoths back in North America, And I often think that I think the dilemma for conservationists is sort of like the dilemma for an ambulance medic is, you're not in an ER. You don't have everything you wish you had. You don't know how to do certain procedures. You don't actually know what's going on. I once picked up a guy and the only wound was a bloodless .22 caliber hole in his chest. He was sitting on a couch talking to me while his wife sat next to him. And he said, and the cops were interviewing him. And he said, the wife and I here were arguing and she accidentally shot me. And so I put him on the gurney and I emphasized there's no blood. It's a .22 caliber, slightly bluish hole in his chest, blue skin. And the guy dies as we unload him at the hospital. So there might have been things that somebody with more advanced equipment training could have done. I didn't have that, And I think conservation biology is kind of like that,
Yeah. When I read that, it struck me like, man, we're all 20-year-old ambulance drivers.
We are
in some weird way.
You are, and you have all these different views about that. That ultimately, we were talking earlier about values. What if it turns out that in order to save the Channel Island gray fox, which is this really cool,
I love that story about the gray fox.
It's just an incredible animal. Well, it turns out invasive bald eagles were eating the foxes. Why were they there? Because they were subsidized by the feral pigs on the island, So this is a very complex ecological story. And if your values are such that you think that little uniquely evolved dwarf, tamish island gray fox that we're saving, you got to get rid of the eagles and the pigs.
Yeah. And how do you choose, right?
Yeah.
And with what tools can you make that choice, right?
Right. And it was very acrimonious. And then what if you screw up? Boy, if you screw up, you're going to be on the nightly news.
Yeah.
You'll get a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, on and on. So
yeah, for every celebration, we saved the gray fox. The channel, look at all the foxes. What dirty business did we have to do to get there?
Yeah, something like that. So I would say, in a way, when I look back on that period of my life, which is now decades ago, it's the grittiness, the uncertainty, the need to, in my view, go ahead and act anyway.
Yeah.
Do the best you can with what you got.
Save what you can save.
Say what you can say. Do the best you can with what you got. Hope that you don't suffer too much for mistakes.
Yeah. And I found in reading your writing that's what struck me is like that at some point in my life, if I live long enough and I've done enough, I'll be able to meditate on the natural world in the way that you have, in the way that it's been informed by all the moments in your life. And in this case, moments that didn't really have much to do with the natural world.
They didn't seem to anyway.
They didn't seem to.
Yeah.
Right? So all this stuff being intertwined is interesting to me. You had a quote in the beginning of your book too. I'm going to give people a lot of beginning of the book stuff, so they'll have to go and get it and read it. A journalist, Bayard Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This is a real good one. He likened nature to a princess fallen into the hands of robbers who cut off her fingers for the sake of the jewels she wears.
Isn't that incredible?
I'm like, dude, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible quote.
It is, isn't it? And I heard that at a dinner for University of California Press authors. So my first book was about snakes, and it was published by them. And I was at a dinner for authors. And this famous historian of California history was given the banquet talk. And he read that quote, and it just electrified me. I mean, I was like, a pencil, a pen, a napkin, And I wrote it down and then later burrowed into, I actually found copies of Bayard Taylor's books to buy, and I because I wanted to read it in the original. I think that's an incredible.
It's
metaphor.
incredible.
Yeah.
It's an incredible metaphor. And like when you first read it, it strikes you as kind of like an environmentalist metaphor, but it's I think it's deeper than that.
I do too, and that's why I used it early in my book, because there is a thread of violence that runs through my own life, and I think it inevitably runs through life, and I think modern humans, especially in some cultures, go to great lengths to deny that, to hide from it. That's one response to it. I'm not putting that down. I mean, I've seen some violence I'd like to hide from. That I'd like to have not seen. So I sort of get that. But in the end, I think it may not serve us well in terms of conservation.
I would agree. And I think in the more modern, like social media sense, this is a weird thing to bring into the conversation, but there's a page on Instagram called Nature is Metal. And Nature is Metal is just some of the craziest, most carnal things you'd ever, predators ripping faces off zebras. It's just like, it's an expression that nature is crazy and scary and brutal, and death defines it, and it's just what it is. And I think that is like a spasmodic, response to people whitewashing nature.
I agree.
And like anthropomorphizing animals, and like so we've had this. That thing is being recognized within our culture, and we're pushing back on it in certain ways, trying to make sure people are aware that in Africa, photo safaris are great, but you're not getting. And I live right by Yellowstone National Park. That's a wonderful place, but it is not nature, and like in the way that you really need to know it.
Yes, and so when I much later in life became a late onset deer hunter, and honestly, should I go ahead and say something about this, or did you want to?
No, you say what you want. Don't worry about me.
When my friend David offered me the opportunity to teach me to deer hunt. And I had an old Model 94 Winchester, which my students at Berkeley had given me as a present. I'm sure I'm the only Berkeley professor ever to get given an old Winchester. But they knew I had a certain nostalgia from my Texas youth, and they actually knew that I specifically wanted a pre-64 Model 94 Winchester.
Beautiful gun.
Beautiful old rifle. And so I got this card one day in my mailbox, and it said, happy sabbatical. This is good for one pre-64 Model 94. You find it and we'll pay for it. And so I walked into a Seattle gun shop and said, I'm looking for an old Model 94. And the guy goes, there's a whole rack of them. Pick out which one you like best. So I went through them, sticking my thumb in the receiver and trying to get enough light to see the riflings and picked out the one I liked best. It turned out from the serial number was made in 1950. So I had this old Winchester. I'd been wanting to try deer hunting for a long time, but I didn't want to be a bozo about it. I knew that. And also ironically, because my grandpa taught me firearm safety and marksmanship, I was a Boy Scout and I was a soldier. I had lots of experience, and I had a lot of experience with gunshot wounds too. I knew a lot about firearms relatively, but I'd never had a gun safety course. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I thought that you had to take one to get a hunting license. So I kept putting it off year after year. Plus I didn't have a mentor, and I felt I needed a mentor. So my friend David, this UT Austin professor, David Hillis, who ranches and hunts, he calls me one September 2009. He goes, Greene, you've run out of excuses. I said, what are you talking about, David? And he said, turns out in Texas, if you were born before 1977,
grandfathered in.
You're grandfathered in, And I thought, God, that's weird. That's kind of crazy, but okay. And he says, yeah, get yourself a carrying case and come on down, and I'll teach you to hunt. So I went down there, and I really didn't know how I'd react. I considered the possibility that I would kill one deer and be disgusted and sell my old rifle.
And how old are you? This
64.
64. So you're a 64-year-old adult onset hunter. We'll label you.
Yeah.
that's what you are.
I had just turned 64 in September, and this was in December. And so I go out, kill my first deer. A few days later, kill a second deer with a borrowed scoped flatter shooting rifle. And in fact, I end up feeling like it's maybe the most respectful thing I've ever done as a nature lover is to own up to my omnivory and to participate like that. Yeah. So that's what happened.
It's worth thinking about where you were in your life. You're a tenured, academic who, and I don't want to generalize academics, but I've talked to a lot of them, the ones that work at Berkeley specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm headed to Cornell next month. being a hunter is not probably how we'll say it. It's not like the prevailing thing to be.
Right.
It just doesn't seem that way to me. I'm sure there's pockets of all kinds of things, but it's just not a thing to be. You're a herpetologist. You've traveled the world. You've done all these things, which we'll talk about, and you've seen more of the natural world than most people. 99.999% of people, and you've found profundity in killing a deer in Texas.
Yeah.
Like that to me it's amazing. You know, at the age of 64, and you'd think that adds some value to like hunting story because it's done that for you. Can you talk about that a little bit, like because it's been a decade or so then since you've been a hunter.
Right. And so maybe I'll add in a little thing about my wife at this point because she's also an academic. So, and it's true, there are certain stereotypes of academics, and they're widely used by diverse people. Ken Brower, who's a very well-known nature writer, he's David Brower's son. He makes fun of people who criticize classic notions of wilderness by calling them pale men in tweeds. Okay, well, I'm writing a book now that directly confronts John Muir and Ed Abbey and sort of that nation of wilderness because I think it's got a serious problem, and I'm trying to address that in this book. I've never worn tweed in my life, and I have a picture in the manuscript of the book of me with a backpack in Paria Canyon, Utah, in the slick rack country, and I say, pale skin, true, no tweeds in sight, So I know where the stereotype of academics comes from because there, in fact, are a lot of academics who seem, we could say, a little detached from other aspects of life as many people live it, but probably not as many as most non-academics think.
Yeah.
Like there are a number of people in my department that hunt, and there are other people in my department who, although they don't hunt themselves, are totally fine with it and even allow those of us who do on their land and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm aware of the prevailing, the new modern liberal. When I walk on college campuses, I'm a little looking around for gender pronoun signs and shit.
Yeah.
What's going on? I have that feeling. Yeah. I know that's not all of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good perspective for you to give too.
And it's probably not fair.
It's not fair. It's not fair at all.
As would be various other stereotypes in various other cultural contexts. But we all have them.
We all have those.
Yeah.
Just to address that, when I was reading some of the stuff that you had said in NPR, an article in NPR, just kind of going back and forth with a professor friend of yours that is, I don't know if we'll say anti-hunting, but some animal rights thoughts. Mm-hmm. It struck me as your place in life, how you got to where you are, and where you are is quite the story, especially as a hunter.
Yeah.
Your first experiences with, when you walk up on a dead deer, you've seen dead things in the wild, you've seen wild things.
Lots of dead things.
What was that like?
The craziest thing, I don't want to veer things that are not really relevant, but I have no religious beliefs.
That's what podcasts are, don't worry.
I have no religious beliefs anymore. And so I walk up to this doe that I've just shot with my old Model 94 Winchester, and it's almost dusk. I've shot. She bounds out of sight left. She's 75 yards away or so. And I know I've hit her, and I know I'm supposed to wait 30 or 45 minutes to make sure she doesn't jump up if she's down. But it's getting dark, and so I do get up. I lever in another round, put it on half-cock safety, and walk looking for her. And I walk 50 yards, and there she is down, and she's got her head up as if she'd been sleeping or taking a nap. And literally, and of course, as you know, this is probably less than 45 seconds after. I mean, in 5 seconds, a deer goes a long way, So this is not like this deer has been running for a long time. And so as I walk up to her, she fades and drops back down. And I go over and touch a leg, and she's dead. I've actually made a good breadbasket shot. And 3 words popped in my head, and I hope I don't screw this up and forget them. But one of them was sacred. And where did that come from? Gratitude was another one, and I can't remember the third one now. But to me, the most interesting is that I came up with the word sacred.
Yeah.
And it just popped into my mind. It was a transformative experience for me. I felt extremely affected by the fact that I had just killed this animal. And of course, then we field dressed it, and later it went back to the freezer in New York, and my family and people we invited for dinner ate that deer. And I had already been on that. That was the first time I was on that ranch. I've been on that ranch many, many, many times since then. And I always think about the fact that when I eat meat from the Texas Hill Country, which is my favorite place on earth, I'm more of a participant and less of a spectator in my favorite place on earth.
Yeah, and I think what's been interesting to me lately is the transformation, how satisfying the transformation from a dead animal to, like, say, a steak is for me. I recently got, people that listen to the podcast will know because I keep talking about it, but I really like it. I got a slicer, like a meat commercial, like a deli meat slicer.
Oh.
And we were talking about the other day, like, why is it so satisfying to me to see this meat coming off the slicer ready to be made into lunch meat?
Oh.
That's an elk that I had killed. Why is that so satisfying? And somebody said, a friend of mine said, because it's just another transformation. It's like another thing that you've done to take the part of that process to transform this living thing into something that is so useful to you. And that's why it's so satisfying. I mean, that's like, you're probably right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so the first time you go through that transformative process and take it home and have a meal with your family back in New York, I'm sure was a big deal.
Well, and not only that, I pay more attention to all my food now than I used to.
Yeah.
And including vegetables. I mean, I'm much more, once I started deer hunting, I became much more interested in eating locally. Like, I even since I moved to Fort Collins, I've been picking raspberries here.
Yeah.
And then I buy peaches. God, the peaches here are unbelievable. Like, the most delicious peaches I've ever eaten in my life. I've been buying at the farmer's market here in Fort Collins every Saturday. And I get a huge sense of satisfaction, pleasure, and some kind of spiritual whatever out of knowing that these weren't, packaged, covered in nitrates, all sorts of stuff. They weren't shipped from Chile. They're from here. I get a lot of pleasure out of that. And looking at my food that way and looking at me eating changed once I became a deer hunter.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. When I really took on hunting as like a part of my lifestyle, then you start thinking, like, why don't I have a garden? Because a garden's a very similar activity.
It is.
So why am I doing this but not that? Gardening's way easier.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually starting to think about gardening.
Yeah.
And I've never had any inclination in that direction before.
Well, I get back to kind of your teachings and your time in the field as a herpetologist, but I read a thing, one of your students at Cornell once described you as the mythical herpetological green giant.
Oh, my gosh.
You remember that?
No, I don't remember that.
Somebody wrote that about you.
Oh, is that right? No, I don't know what
that was about when you retired. They had a thing called Greene Fest.
That's true.
Tell me about that. You retired from Cornell and they just threw a party.
Yeah. So one of my former PhD students, a man named Jonathan Lassos, who at that time was a Harvard professor, there's something you could stereotype and probably not be entirely fair.
I'm picturing a man in an ascot.
Yeah. So, but Jonathan, who's also one of my dearest friends, he and my wife basically organized a party for me. And they invited about a dozen people to speak. And so it started Friday night with a party at my house where we served wild boar and venison. And then all day Saturday there were talks out at the Laboratory of Ornithology, which is an institution on our campus on the side of town. And so we invited a dozen people that range from my boss at Berkeley, who's older than I am, to a woman I first met when as a Ithaca high school student. She took my biology class, and she's now a professor at Michigan State. So we had all the way from youth to almost elderly. We had men and women. They gave talks about what they do, sort of to celebrate my retirement. It was extremely touching, and I'm afraid I was in a bit of a daze the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I guess in the herpetology world, which I'm not familiar with, like, you had a big impact in your life. I mean, you've written hundreds of papers, how many field studies and books and things like that. Can you just give people an idea of the breadth of your work with? I think snakes is probably the thing most people would be interested in.
Yeah.
You did a lot of work with them.
I mostly worked on snakes. So I got a master's and a PhD in for those graduate degrees, you have to do a piece of research. You have to write a master's thesis for a master's degree, and you have to write a doctoral dissertation. And the topics of both of my graduate degrees had to do with snake biology. And so I'm especially interested in what and how snakes eat. So, for example, I've looked in the stomachs of thousands of, maybe even tens of, certainly many thousand museum specimens to see what their last meal was.
Oh, really?
Or if there is one. So snakes tend to eat big meals and therefore not so frequently. So just by chance, if people go out and preserve a bunch of snakes and put them in a museum, only a relatively small fraction will have food in their stomach because they don't eat very
Yeah,
well.
they don't eat. Yeah.
So on average, I probably get about a 10% return. But I have looked at literally thousands of specimens all over the world in the world's great museums. I get the curator's permission to make a little slit, and then I look in the stomach. And it's like Christmas. I never know what I'm going to find. You know?
Yeah. What did you find? What are some of the things that we need to know about?
Crazy. The largest meals that any snakes in the world eat weigh upwards of 140 to 160% of their own mass. So you look like kind of a 180 pound guy.
Yeah,
so imagine you eating a 270 pound cheeseburger with no utensils and no arms. You literally walk your head around a 270 pound cheeseburger and then crawl off with it. That's what vipers can do. And so and then sort of the second thing that I did and started doing was I wanted to watch snakes in the wild. I wanted to see what they do.
What's the craziest thing you found in a snake's gut before? Like
the craziest thing ever?
Yeah.
Whoa, I've seen a lot of crazy things.
Give me like 5 crazy things. This is interesting, man.
Well, in an aquatic coral snake, which is a venomous cobra relative that lives in South America, I found 5 eels. And there were 5 of them there, and one of them was only a tail left. It was the one that had been eaten longest ago, so it was the one most digested. And then as you went anteriorly in the gut, these items had been eaten more and more recently, and the most recent one was a completely intact eel that had probably been eaten just minutes before some biologist killed the coral snake and put it in a museum.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool, right?
That's cool.
Another one that was very insightful was I found a Pacific rattlesnake from California that had eaten a ground squirrel. And the really interesting thing about vipers, they have these long folding fangs, and they have this tissue-destructive cocktail of venoms that are made in a gland on each side of their head, you know? And basically when a rattlesnake or any viper wants to kill a prey item like a rabbit or a squirrel, it waits in ambush, it launches itself, it stabs these 2 hypodermic needles into the prey, simultaneously compresses these 2 glands. It's essentially like it has a pair of hypodermic needles, and the barrel's filled with digestive and immobilizing cocktail. And so the rattlesnake goes like that, squirts in and releases almost instantly in a fraction of a second, minimizing the chance the rabbit or the squirrel might hurt it. And the rabbit or squirrel goes bounding off. One time we watched a rattlesnake bite a rabbit, and the rabbit hopped 90 yards before it fell over. It took the rattlesnake almost 3 hours to find the rabbit, and it tracked the exact path of the rabbit. Turns out rattlesnakes are putting a tracker molecule in their prey with the venom. And so it followed, like the rabbit went in.
So can it smell or sense that molecule?
With its tongue, which is an odor carrier. There's a special organ in the roof of the mouth where the actual sensing happens, and the tongue carries in these odor molecules. So the rattlesnake strikes the rabbit goes bounding off on this very irregular path over a rocky slope, and the rattlesnake this is a rattlesnake only about this big. It takes 3 hours. I held my hands up.
About 3 feet long.
About 3 feet long. It takes it almost 3 hours, and it follows the precise, circuitous path of this rabbit. By the time it finds the rabbit's not only dead, but it's being digested from the inside out, because the rabbit, with its dying heartbeats, it's like if you injected meat with a tenderizer.
Yeah,
it's in actually some recipes you do inject meat with butter or whatever. Well, the rattlesnake has just injected 2 glands fulls of this digestive enzyme cocktail in the rabbit, and as the rabbit bounds off dying, its own heartbeats are circulating these digestive enzymes throughout its tissue. So when the rattlesnake finally gets there and starts to walk its head over this meal that's maybe 50% of its mass, the rabbit digestion is already well underway. It's an incredible thing. How's that?
I don't know. I'm kind of speechless. Keep going.
No, that'll do.
That'll do. I read that. I guess I just ask like the obvious question. What's the most frightening encounter you've had with a snake?
With a snake?
Yeah.
That's actually pretty easy because I've almost never frightened of snakes. So I long ago got over sort of macho showing off. In fact, I've actually calculated how risky is it to manhandle a venomous snake, pick it up, show off the fangs to the nearest fellow teenager, preferably a girl. You know, I mean that's sort of the old macho approach to venomous snakes is you manhandle them all that. And we now know that that's a stupid risk. It's not necessary. It's really hard on the snakes. We don't do it anymore. And I got over that. And so I've generally had a sort of risk-aversive, respectful approach to studying venomous snakes my whole life. But when I first started working in Costa Rica in about 1981, all of my venomous snake experience was with pit vipers, mostly rattlesnakes in the U.S., which are in fact pretty easy to deal with. I mean, we could have a big rattlesnake in this room where we're sitting. If I had a snake hook, we could just keep talking. I mean, it's just not that hard if you're respectful and know what you're doing to work with U.S. pit vipers. So I get to Costa Rica and there's this really big snake. There's two of them actually, but one of them, the more common, used to be called a fertilance. Costa Ricans call them terciopelo, which means velvet in Spanish. It's a massive snake. The big females are like 6.5 to 7 feet long. The head it'd be exaggerating to say it was as big as my hand, but it's a big head, really long fangs, very toxic venom. It's the most dangerous snake in terms of killing people in Costa Rica by far. And I had no field experience with them. And so I really wanted to catch one. And I was at some part of this preserve where I was working, and somebody came and said, Harry, they've spotted a big fertilance in this little swamp below the bat tree. It's this place I knew. So with my assistant time, I literally jogged about a kilometer, about a half mile over there and couldn't find it. So then I walked back to where I'd been, and just a few minutes later they come and they go, we spotted it. So we jog this kilometer again, and I sort of stumble down this long slope, and there is a big fertilance. And it's lying on the surface of this mud. And so I'm a little out of breath, I wasn't thinking clearly. And so I have my big snake hook and I just slog into the mud, and the snake draws back into a striking pose right at my feet almost when I barely touch it with the hook. And I'm thinking that so what I thought was that I would go out like as if it was a rattlesnake, and I would lift it on my snake hook over onto dry land, and then I would bag it, and I'd find some way to get it. So I slog out of the mud. It's crawling away from me. I touch it with my snake hook, and it whips around right at my feet and is facing up at me like it's ready to strike. And I was completely taken aback. And the first thing I noticed was that I couldn't move. My legs were stuck. The mud? I had gotten in just over my knees, and I couldn't move. And the second thing, I actually remember thinking, I wish I had a pistol, but I didn't. And so I raised my snake hook over my head, and I thought, if it strikes, I'm going to try to disable it with a blow. And instead, it just turned around and took off into the swamp.
What are the chances you could have disabled it?
I don't know.
Great.
I don't know. Fortunately, we didn't have to answer that because it just went away, which is what even really dangerous snakes almost always want to do. And I was so mired that somebody had to get a tree branch to get me out. And that's the most uneasy I've been in my life.
I'm uneasy just listening to it.
And that happened a long time ago. And I've never done anything that stupid again with a venomous snake. So.
How much have you thought about and read about just kind of our relationship to snakes, the way we see them, kind of like their place in our culture throughout history?
A lot. I mean, it's a big theme in my current writing and research. And so,
how would you boil that down for folks? Like, what's the best way to think about how humans approach snakes and kind of the way that they are in our psyche? Because when I picture that snake curled up and ready to strike you, it's demonic in my mind.
Yeah. So when I was writing my first book, which was about snakes, I was reviewing all this natural history literature. I basically wanted to read everything I could find about all the snakes in the world in terms of what they do. And so I was just winnowing all this natural history literature over the last 150 years or so about snakes. And I encountered something I didn't expect, which was that every major group of primates, which is to say lemurs, tarsiers, New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, and apes, including us, every major group of primates, I found observations of them both killing and being killed by snakes. And what I thought was so fascinating was it wasn't just the one. So if it was just that snakes are really dangerous to us, well, fine, so are Cape buffalo.
Yeah, so are many things.
Yeah. So fine, I get it. Spiders, But it turned out it's not just that. It's that also not only humans, but other primates, they're attracted to snakes. They mob them. Sometimes they pick up sticks and kill them. They throw stuff at them. Sometimes they eat them. So it turns out capuchin monkeys in Brazil basically distinguish two kinds of snakes. One kind of snake is vipers, coral snakes, and the mimics that look like them, and boas. And all the other snakes, several dozen species that a herpetologist would say are many different kinds, they're just one kind. They're the kind that's not a boa, a viper, or that's not dangerous.
The scary kind and the safe kind.
That's right. And so these capuchin monkeys, they find the first type, they make a big commotion, they throw stuff, they get sticks, they even kind of take sticks and jab them at the viper in the crevice. The other kind is grab and eat and throw the carcass down half eaten. So even a non-human primate like a capuchin, when you get to people, it's all over the place. You have people that hate snakes, but then you have whole cultures that deify them.
Yeah.
There are people, you don't kill cobras in India. You have people in the eastern U.S. who handle rattlesnakes as part of their scriptural interpretation of the Bible, Yeah. So there's this, what I find fascinating ambivalence. And I think the reason is that on the one hand, if you don't see the snake that either wants to eat you or is scared of you, you can get hurt really badly, really quickly. Your whole life can change and maybe end in a matter of seconds. On the other hand, a snake is about the easiest vertebrate animal to disable on Earth. I mean, it's basically one long vertebral column. A good hard blow any place along that column, you've got a disabled snake, and you can eat it. It's a fine chunk of protein. So I think that's at the heart of it, that it goes way back. So I give talks on this general topic, and I call it the 75 million year old deadly dialogue, because snakes are about 100 million years old, and primates are about 75 million years old. So ever since primates have been on Earth, we've only been around, Homo sapiens actually only a few 100,000 years.
That's right.
So we have this long history, and it's a heritage, and it's a fraught one.
Yeah.
It's fraught with both the possibility of an easy meal. It's fraught with a certain fascination. I mean, what the heck? No legs, 2 penises? I mean,
that's it. That's a T-shirt.
There you go.
A herpetology T-shirt. No legs and 2 penises.
Well, there used to be one that said snakes have something extra. It had a big picture of a snake penis. But so there, it's a very fraught relationship.
Yeah.
And many people think that we are innately afraid of snakes. I think that's probably not true. I think it's pretty clear we have built-in mechanisms that make it easier to recognize snakes than other things.
Yeah.
But I think the fear part probably gets connected within an individual based on experience, teaching, so forth.
I think those connections are made, right? The serpent,
exactly.
Like most cartoons, my son watches a thing called the Gruffalo, and the snake comes out. He goes, "Oh, a snake!" He doesn't know.
That's right.
He grew up in for his first 2 years in Texas, and then moved to Montana. He's never seen a snake.
Yeah,
I've never had an instance to talk to him about a snake. Yeah. Yet when he sees one on a show that is kind of it's not a bad or good snake. The snake's just a character in the little thing he's watching. He's
fascinated.
He's fascinated.
Yeah.
And when a fox walks out, he doesn't go, "Oh, look, a fox."
Yeah.
But when a snake comes out,
I
don't know. Like you said, I don't know if it's just the nature of what it is, or how it looks, or how it moves, and it's the unique characteristics.
Yeah. There are definitely features that define snakiness. And one study, for example, involved. This has been done with both children and with macaques, a kind of monkey. You show them a screen that has like 9 different images. And the images vary from flowers to mushrooms to spiders to snakes, a bunch of stuff. And then you set this up so that the subject, as they're called, is rewarded for picking out something they're shown. So they're shown something and told, pick this out.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you give a child or a macaque a second or more, they can pick out with equal facility a spider, a mushroom, or a snake. If you cut it down to about 600 milliseconds, that's just over half a second, they can still pick out spiders and snakes. If you cut it down to 300 milliseconds, so only about a quarter of a second, they can only pick out snakes, which is just consistent with lots of other studies that suggest we have some sort of recognition mechanisms at the level of brain function.
Kind of cognitive function that's like, oh, snake.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And many of us who've worked in the field, and this has happened to me. I once was working in Costa Rica. The other big viper there is called a bushmaster. It's even bigger. It's doesn't cause nearly as many accidents, but it's it's the biggest viper in the world. And I had a radio transmitter in one. We surgically implanted it. So I was looking for that snake. It was a smallish one, like 4 or 5 feet long. I had 2 other experienced herpetologists with me. And it was in the middle of the day. Well, you can see. And all of a sudden, I knew there was a huge bushmaster that I just bumped my right foot against. And I knew it at some preconscious level because I screamed an expletive and had to shove this even bigger guy to my left out of the way, because I knew that I just woke up this like 7.5 foot bushmaster with my right foot, and it was drawing back. I don't think it was drawing back to strike. I think I had literally woken it up.
Yeah, you were both drawing back at the
we
same time.
We were both drawing back.
Right?
We were making equally appropriate responses, But I know that recognition and that action skipped all sorts of conscious functions.
Do you feel like we've had other biologists on that spend a lot of time around a certain species, whether it's a grizzly bear or something else, and they always seem to have different feelings for the thing that they've studied? Where do you land with snakes? Do you have an affection for them?
Yeah, I do.
As it were?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Snakes, a thing that's tough about snakes is that you can't read them very well. So they don't have eyelids. They don't have lips like mammals do, So I especially love dogs. I have 2 labs, and I talk to them all the time. I love them dearly. I'm totally distraught if anything's wrong with either one, And it's a little harder to get that way about snakes because you don't get as much affect. You don't feel that. And I think a lot of us, including me, used to think there wasn't much in there. And just in the last 10 years or so, 20 years, but last 10 especially, we've discovered parental care. We've discovered what's called alloparenting. That's when one mom takes care of somebody else's babies. So it turns out rattlesnakes have alloparenting.
Wow.
We've discovered snakes modifying their ambush environment to solve a problem that may not actually occur for several days. So here's an example of that. This is maybe the coolest thing I've ever seen in the field. I was watching a big black-tailed rattlesnake in the Chiricahua Mountains of Arizona. It was actually male number 40. And
Is this in the one I wrote down? You radio collared 50 black-tailed rattlesnakes in Arizona.
Well, they're not collared because you can't put a collar on a snake, but
where you implant something.
You implant it, yeah. And that's how we discovered parental care in them and stuff, because we were watching these pregnant moms, and we thought they were just going to give birth and their babies would leave, because that's what we all knew happened. And they gave birth and they didn't leave. They stayed with their babies, and all this cool stuff happened, And then it turns out 10 days after birth, the babies shed their skin the first time. That the whole thing ends then. So we documented all that. But the absolutely mind-blowingest thing was we were watching this big male, and he was cruising through a little shady, cobbled, dry stream bed, and all of a sudden he stops abruptly, and he starts tongue flicking meticulously about 2 square yards of leaf litter, which I later found had a chipmunk trail going right through it. I found the runway. But I didn't know that first. So he tongue flicks for 13 minutes. I've got my stopwatch running. I'm watching with binoculars. My collaborator, the Tucson physician, is watching. And then after 13 minutes, he coils into this stereotyped ambush posture that a viper uses when it's going to sit and wait for something to come by. And they may wait, incidentally, for days or even weeks for that animal to come by. So he gets all ready, and that was cool to watch, but we knew that's what they did. What happened next, though, was there was a dead fern, a brown dried fern, about 8 inches right in front of his face. It was right in his prospective strike path. It'd be as if you got set up to ambush a deer, and then there's all these saplings in the way.
This snake is cutting shooting lanes.
Exactly, and that's what he did. So we're watching, And all of a sudden he reaches out with this very stereotyped posture. It looks sort of like a shepherd's crook. And it's what male rattlesnakes use to fight with other rattlesnakes. So if you look up on YouTube, just look for rattlesnakes fighting, you'll see what I'm talking about. They rise up in the air and they push each other down. And they use a stereotyped little crook in their neck for the pushing down part. It's like arm wrestling. But this guy did it, and he pushed the fern out of the way. He bent the fern down and then went back into his ambush posture. And I was like, nobody's going to believe me, because I didn't have a video camera. And I turned to Dave and I said, what'd you just see? And he said, wow, he bent that fern down. I go, yeah. And then I'm writing my notes, A few years later, a former postdoc of mine, Rulon Clark, is a professor at San Diego State now. He started using remote videography to study rattlesnake behavior. And he got video of multiple rattlesnakes making these ambush tunnels through brush in California. And so they're trying to ambush California ground squirrels. And they'll stick their body out and kind of beat in all directions and sort of form this little hollow in the brush where they're going to strike the squirrel when it comes.
They're hunting.
They're hunting, and as you say, it's a perfect analogy.
It's a perfect analogy.
They're cutting shooting lanes.
They're cutting shooting lanes.
Who would have believed it? I mean, if I told you a panda did that, you might think it's true. And if I told you a macaque or a chimpanzee did it, sure. But this was a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
It does not have a big brain,
And it's
doing all this cool stuff.
Do you feel like one thing that strikes me about like your proximity to these creatures and like knowing them so much? What do you think about their place in the natural world?
Yeah.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
I'm sure you've thought about that at length.
I have. And what about their place in our world?
Yeah.
That would be the second question we could ask. I mean, it's pretty clear they are predators, and so actually they're predators sort of out of proportion to their body size because they can eat things so big. So, for example, I mentioned bushmasters in Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. A bushmaster might weigh 4 to 10 pounds. It eats the same prey that a 35-pound ocelot eats. Okay, so a western diamondback rattlesnake, a big western diamondback rattlesnake might weigh 4 or 5, a really big one, maybe 10 pounds. It's eating the same thing that a bobcat or a coyote eats that outweighs it by a factor of like 4 or something. That's because it's a snake.
Yeah.
You know, and so they are at the same level in a food pyramid or a food web as a mammal that weighs several times what they do. So they play important roles like that. We're actually still kind of finding out what they do. And the coolest thing lately is it turns out they're seed dispersers. So, you know, plants, when they make seeds and fruit and all that, we might think they make it so we can have tasty breakfast, but the plant is really dispersing its offspring when it makes fruit. You know, it hopes that something will eat the fruit, pass it through its gut, and the seeds will go through, get pooped out, and go somewhere else. That's how it disperses. That's how it sends its kids off to college.
There was a term that somebody used recently, ecosystem services.
Absolutely.
And I was like, that like clicked something in my head. Like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
All of these things are doing a service to the ecosystem.
That's right. So it turns out we discovered accidentally, one of my former students, when we were looking in the museum guts, there are all these black things, these little black dots in the gut of these desert rattlesnakes. What we're really looking at, we think, is fur and teeth and digested mammal. And he showed it to me through a microscope, and I went, I don't know, maybe they're seeds, whatever. Didn't hit me. And then he calls me back in, and he shows me out of the colon. So this is the end of the gut. And I don't know how to, I'm going to describe it to you, but it looked like this. And there was a little seedling coming out of it. So we found germinated seeds in the colons of these rattlesnakes. These rattlesnakes are eating kangaroo rats, which have pouches. So the kangaroo rat goes around picking up all these seeds, stuffing its pouch like a hamster, goes into its burrow, takes all it out, and has a little cache, you know. The plant is hoping that some fraction of those seeds won't ever actually get eaten and will germinate in this nice, cool, dark, moist place. That's the plant's bet, you know. Well, if the seeds from that plant end up in the pouch of a kangaroo rat that gets eaten by a sidewinder, which is not a very big rattlesnake, that plant just hit the dispersal jackpot, because a sidewinder rattlesnake has a home range radius of like 5 to 10 times what the kangaroo rat has.
Yeah, just rolling around on the ground, dropping seeds.
That's right. So there's another ecosystem service for you.
I love that term. I don't know why it struck me like, yes.
Yeah.
Because we were thinking about biodiversity.
That's right.
Thinking about what, you know, we're not very serviceable creatures when it comes to a lot of things that we do. But when you start thinking about the game that we pursue and the way we think about elk and stuff like that, every animal you see has a service.
That's right.
A service to the elk and vice versa.
That's right.
Or deer.
And so that second question, which you inspired me to bring up, though, is we could also talk about, well, what would be the place of rattlesnakes in our lives, you know?
Yeah.
And, of course, one response was they're a potential death threat, so we should get rid of them whenever possible. In fact, we now know why you die from rattlesnake bite. We now know how to prevent it. Snake bite is a very low public health problem in this country. It's a huge public health problem in some countries, but that's because of lack of adequate medical care.
That's right. Yeah.
So once when I try to teach people to appreciate rattlesnakes, I always start out by admitting the danger and being very candid about it. So I think that's the way to go. I think that's the way to go with elephants, with bison, with anything that could hurt you, is to start out by being honest about it and not trying to hide from it. And then you talk about how you can ameliorate those dangers. And then you can enjoy this incredible stuff. Like, I can see the look on your face when I'm telling you about the rabbit going 90 yards.
I'm
Then she finds it and eats it, and she just got 1/3 of her annual grocery bill in one predation event. How can you not marvel at that? How can you not think your world is richer?
I took the wrong damn job.
Yeah.
Should have been a herpetologist.
Yeah.
Something.
So-
I told my wife like a couple weeks ago, she's like, what do you think about the future? I said, I want to go back and be a wildlife biologist.
Yeah.
You know why? It's because there's so much understanding that you miss. Or, well, I guess I put it the other way. There's so much out there that you could know.
Yes.
You know, so much of the intricacy of the natural world that you could know. And it informs everything that you do.
Yes, that's right.
Everything that you do. And that's why I like Tracks and Shadows so much, because it was like kind of a transcendental meditation of all the things kind of in a gumbo. Like all the experiences connect to each other. Mm-hmm. And you can live a more enlightened life if you understand a snake.
Yeah.
And what it does for an ecosystem, and how it germinates a seed, and how that seed comes from a mouse, and how that mouse ate the seed, and how that plant hopes to do those things.
Yep.
And those understandings are seminal to our life. Like they are what we are.
Yeah, and I think when you become a more candid, blatant participant, I mean, I think a lot of, especially, first world modern humanity is we've ironically distanced ourselves from nature. I say ironic because I think some of the real champions of environmentalism, on the one hand, bemoan that we're disjunct from nature, and then there are whole kinds of activities they don't want to participate in, which are actually being part of nature instead of being it indirectly.
Yeah, their environmentalism is at some level kind of a detachment.
That's right.
Mechanism.
I believe that's true. They become somewhat more spectators than participants, and so as you can tell from reading my book, I mean, there's a reason why it's the next to the last chapter and it's called Born Again Predator. And so here I spent my whole life studying predators and thinking about what that entails ecologically, psychologically, all these things, and then I get to go there.
Yeah, man.
And I tried to tell the reader what it was like to have had the life I've had and then to go there.
Yeah.
And I hope I succeeded in showing that it was really transformative to me.
You did.
It really it was a life enhancing experience and has been ever since.
Yeah, I've read as many accounts as I get my hands on that's similar to yours, kind of what the natural world gives and what you give it, and kind of a life lived like that. And I think this was one of the best I've ever read. And I wrote something down I wanted to make sure I didn't miss, that you wrote that our psyches are linked to predators with wildness. Like the way that we are, like the reason we think about even charismatic megafauna or the opposite, you know, we think about them in different ways. You know, they're connected to us in different ways. Some people, I think, that manifests itself in like a sympathy. We were talking before we hit record about sympathy, right? They have a sympathy for bears or a sympathy for predators. And then other people, there's an understanding that leads to empathy that allows you to kind of understand their place a little bit better. And some people, I'd imagine, use their disconnect via fear. You know, so there's lots of ways you can link to a predator. But talk about that for you, like what that means to be linked to a predator with a psyche.
Yeah, and to the prey too. I mean, we are potential prey. We used to be. We're not so much in the United States anymore, although in some places you might still be.
In Montana, there.
Yeah, and so I told you I'm interested in the book I'm writing now. I'm interested in, especially in this word wild, because in the U.S. and I think it really is fair to say it's an especially North American environmentalist 20th century perspective. And 21st now, we tended to define wildness in terms of whether or not people are sort of functionally part of it all.
Yeah, untouched.
And we've defined them out of it. And, you know, the first thing you can say is, well, how about words like Shoshone and Comanche and things like that? But another thing is that, like we were talking about earlier, there's this irony of bemoaning that we're not part of nature, that we're disjunct. In fact, the masthead for Friends of the Earth, back when I was a Berkeley professor, said, "Not man apart," which is a line from a Robinson Jeffers poem. Not man apart, bemoaning being apart from nature. And yet we've done all this stuff that keeps us, I think, makes us ever more distant from the fact that we are inevitably, ultimately, functioning parts of ecosystems. You know, food goes in, food goes out. Yeah. If there's a lot of it, we're going to eat. If there's a lot of us, we're going to be eating a lot of things of one sort or another, and a lot of stuff's going to come out. And we're going to have to deal with both of that. And we've done these things, especially as modern first world people, to almost like hide from that. Yeah. And so I'm all for getting people back out in nature. I don't make fun of vegans. I don't make fun of other people's life choices, especially about ethical issues, you know. And so I think there's ways that they can do it too.
Oh,
I mean, they can farm. They can admit that if you clear a place to make a soy field or an almond orchard, there'll be almost no biodiversity left. And those animals will not go somewhere else. We'd all like to hope that they go somewhere else. They mostly don't.
You made that point in your book as well, to say, like, we think that all these organisms, if we, you know, we're a bit of a virus or a bacteria. Yeah. We move into a place and we clear it off and we kind of remove its natural way. Like there's no, in our country, no undisturbed dirt that I can think of. Even in wilderness, these are
to some extent.
To some extent. And so, you know, we define native as some length of time that we've prescribed. Oh, that's native is this many years. Well, that's just a thing that we've said. And so at some point, I wonder how we put all that stuff together. You how we get to a point where we really understand what we are within nature, and whether it's. I often look at somebody smarter than me. I once read that, like, if you're flying in a plane, say you're over Yellowstone National Park, there'll be this splendor, and I fly over those areas a lot. It's like it seems pristine and untouched, and as you move towards Los Angeles, it seems as if the earth has gotten some sort of sickness.
Uh-huh.
And as you move towards Los Angeles, the sickness gets increasingly evident. And as you get to Los Angeles, it looks like some bacteria has grown in an area, and it looks very unhealthy. If you were to if an alien came down. And so for me, I think that's true. But that doesn't. There's echoes of environmentalism in that thought. But for me, I feel like yes, we are that. But how do I make sure I understand my piece in that greater giant organism? This getting a little deep, but how do I understand my piece of that greater giant organism that I am? I don't hate myself for being a part of it. How do I be a better part of it, and what does it all mean? Yeah. And I think the environmentalist might say, like, I hate humans for being what they are. Yeah.
And I'm sure you don't intend to, and I certainly want to say that I don't mean to stereotype all environmentalists as one thing, and I get all that, but I think there is a brand of a segment of environmentalism, and especially in the U.S. I don't think you would see it nearly as much in Latin America. If you were talking to conservation biologists and nature lovers there, I don't think you'd see it as much in Europe. It's a sort of a privileged notion of, that's if we could, it'd all be like that, and we would only take pictures and leave only footprints. And I've come to think that that's not the way forward. So I think we all start with realizing that we can't escape our presence, and all this sort of like it's sort of like anthropophobic or something. And I find I just can't embrace that. I mean, I am a person. I had a mother and father. I'm married to somebody. I have a brother. I have a niece I love. I mean. You say you want to get rid of 5 out of the 7 billion people on Earth right now. Well, which 5 billion would you pick? Are you going to be the privileged one that gets to say so? It's not that I don't understand feeling like that. I just don't think it gets us very far. Yeah. And so I want to push us, starting by admitting that we're all part of nature. We never were apart from it. We still eat. We still poop. We still, we're all part of it. And now what can we do to preserve as much of the rest of this biological heritage that 4 billion years of evolution have left us with, that we can all, how can we make it so that your grandkids might at least have the option of deciding whether they're excited about seeing a rattlesnake or an elephant? Yeah. Wouldn't just 12,000 years ago, there were 5 or 6 kinds of elephant relatives in the United States. That's less than twice the age of a bristlecone pine tree. Yeah. So forget about the Pleistocene being ancient. It was only 12,000 years ago. The last mammoth on Earth was about 3,400 years ago, about the time Babylon was being sacked. So we used to have a much more diverse world. We're simplifying it at a horrifically fast pace. Wouldn't it be terrible if there were no elephants left in? How would you like to have to tell your grandkids, wow, we used to have these things called elephants? No shit, we really did. They had a trunk. They weren't just in pictures. We had them, but we don't anymore. Wouldn't it be?
I think that's the worst outcome, right?
What a stain.
It's the worst outcome. And I think of, people that don't agree with hunting, like, think that hunting might lead to less elephants. Mm-hmm. If done right, it's a prescription for more elephants.
It might be. I think the elephant thing in particular is very complex, but the fact is every elephant will die too. Yeah. Just like I was talking about that earlier with deer. Every bird will die. I think I didn't quite finish my thought about the birds, but here's these 3 billion birds killed by cats. All those birds are going to die anyway. So the issue is when, how frequently, and what will be the consequence of the particular way that they die. And that's what we want to know. If cats are killing birds at a rate that is causing birds to plummet in terms of sustainable population, that's a really big deal. If cats are a source of mortality of birds, but bird populations were remaining constant, that would be a very different picture. And so I don't feel like I'm in a position to prescribe what we should do for most of these problems, but I think starting by admitting that we are inevitably part of nature is really important. And I think getting out and participating, fishing, gardening, farming, hunting, Those are ways of really owning up to the fact that we are indeed participants.
Yes, I read another paper that you wrote called "Rewilding Our Lives."
Oh, thanks.
It was great. And you said there's a couple questions you asked, but the most poignant one I think is how wild a world do we want, as opposed to how wild a world we will tolerate. Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah,
because we all in our minds want this Yellowstone National Park wild world that's both accessible to us but also wild. Mm-hmm. But really, those two things will come at odds.
They will inevitably, and so I think we've got to negotiate a whole set of relationships, and I've sort of imagined that conceptually it would be almost like concentric circles outward from pure wildness.
Yeah.
But I would say that even pure wildness, most places on Earth, have a place for human presence. And the issue is how much presence, what are we doing there, and so forth. So I think the only places that were ever wild in the sense of take only pictures and leave only footprints were the poles.
Yeah.
Even the inner Sahara has had people that work there, So I really am interested in exploring the difference between this kind of pure wilderness notion in which people don't really have any place at all. Yeah. That's the key thing, at all. Nobody denies that if you put tens of thousands of people living in Yellowstone, we'll lose a lot. I'm not arguing for that, but I am arguing that people have always been parts of all this.
Yeah, there's levels to it, right?
There's levels. Yeah.
Somebody described Yellowstone to me like an ambassador for the natural world. There's people who would never have the wherewithal to understand what you understand from your years of work. You just don't have the interest in it. Different people have different interests. Some people have more urban interests, and that's what they do. They're a cultural society. They like to be around these buzzing hives of energy, human energy. They don't long for things that you and I probably long for, which is being alone or being with few people out in the middle of nowhere. And so like Yellowstone becomes an ambassador for those folks. They can go and see it. And that's just a level of kind of the natural world. It's kind of like the top level that you can see, but there's so many deeper things that you can get into. And for somebody like me, over the last couple of years, I've realized that I can't really operate without deeper levels of understanding. And that's just me. That's not everybody. But I'm not happy without that. And hunting is just a good way for me to find a deeper level of understanding.
Absolutely.
But for herpetology is another way.
It's true.
And you've had some crazy. You had a jaguar story too, didn't you? From being in Costa Rica.
I've been around jaguars a fair amount. I've only actually seen one once, and it was just fleeting.
Like the mystical.
It crossed the trail in front of us at night, and it squinted at us through in our flashlight, and then it disappeared. Many times, especially in the 80s where I worked, it was not uncommon to find their droppings, and sometimes really fresh. I mean, you almost imagined you could see steam coming up. And jaguar droppings are big. I mean, we're talking big. And often you can see that this one is all peccary fur, or this one's got a sloth claw in it, or something like that. And so. And their tracks, jaguar tracks, are really splayed, unlike puma tracks. So puma tracks tend to be more parallel-sided. And a big puma might have a footprint like something like that, for it. And a big jaguar track, because they tend to occur in moisture habitats and walk on their toes are kind of splayed. So a big jaguar track I can only imagine a tiger track. I've never been around tigers.
I wish.
But yeah.
Do you think of, I think I keep going back to Tracks and Shadows because it struck me in a lot of ways. It took you a long time to get there, right? You had to take when I was reading and I was thinking of the concept of you had to spend a lot of time in like micro moments, like a lot of studying, scat and these things you're talking about that like really on the ground moments. And there must have been a time in your life where you were able to take it to a macro level and started to think about your overall understanding of the things you've learned from those micro instances. Can you give people was there a moment where you started to think, man, I got to write this book. I got to meditate on everything I've learned, everything I've done. Because I think, to me at least, that's an interesting introspection.
Yeah. Well, by coincidence, it involves Montana, the answer. So it's the early 80s. I'm an assistant professor coming up for tenure pretty soon at Berkeley. I'm writing scientific papers because that's the coin of the realm. That's the last stage of doing scientific scholarship, is to publish a peer-reviewed paper.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing, and that's my job to do that. But I'm in my early 30s. I'm out of the Army. I'm so glad I didn't have to go to Vietnam at the last minute. I already had the ambulance stuff. I've been divorced twice. All these things are swirling around, and I'm thinking, God, I want to write something else. I want to write about what this other stuff means. And a friend gives me a book called A River Runs Through It by Norman MacLean. Yeah. And I it's just a little book, and it's actually 3 stories, but it's the title novella, I think, that blew my mind. I read it in one sitting, and I saw the possibility of because I had thought, well, if you want to write about these life and death things, you got to write fiction. And I'm no Hemingway or I'm no Jim Harrison. I didn't know about Jim Harrison yet at that point. And I had this misconception that I would never do that because I don't know how to write. I couldn't see myself writing fiction. And then I read A River Runs Through It, which is only scarcely fiction. It's, and I saw what he could. There's a single paragraph in which in the middle of a paragraph, his brother abruptly gets killed in an alley. And I thought to myself, that's how it really is. That's how when you get the phone call from your mom and you think she's calling to invite you for dinner, and it turns out Marcia's been murdered. Your first lover's been murdered. That's what literature can do. I saw that MacLean did that in that paragraph. Just going along. It's a Presbyterian father. I went fly fishing, and my brother was killed in an alley. Jesus. This is something. So Norman MacLean by then was an elderly retired English professor at the University of Chicago. And you probably know all this. Mm-hmm. Many publishers turned down that book, and Chicago published it as the first work of fiction the University of Chicago Press had ever published. And at first it started out slow, and then eventually, it's gazillions and all these languages and stuff. So I knew the editor at Chicago at that time. And this is before, so we're talking snail mail. And I write her and I go, oh my God, Susan, I just read the most incredible book from your press, A River Runs Through It. And I went on for like 3 paragraphs about why this book just captured me. And she writes me back a couple weeks later. I get back from her and she goes, well, Norman comes in to get his royalty check from time to time. And I showed him your letter. And he says, this guy can write. He should write a book. And so she says, Norman thinks you should write a book. So then I got an address and I wrote to Norman MacLean. I said, Dr. MacLean, I'm coming to Chicago to do some snake work at the Field Museum, but I'd like to take you out to dinner. And he writes me back. He says, I'll take you to dinner at the faculty club. So I get on a plane, I fly to Chicago, I do my work in the Field Museum looking at stomach contents, and I have dinner with Norman MacLean. He's like 80 years old. And first thing he tells me that surprised me is that he's written another book. And I go, oh, really? What's it about? And he says, it's called Young Men and Fire. And I go, oh, wow, what's that about? Oh, it's about this tragic fire, And he says, but I've got about another year's worth of work to do on it. And that took me back because I thought that great writers had just spilled from their pen, And here he's telling me he's finished a manuscript, but he's got another year of work to do on it. So, and then I thought, well, I'm going to have dinner and I'm going to tell him about going into burning buildings and saving people and all this stuff, being an ambulance driver. And he didn't seem very interested in it. And several times during the dinner, he said, why don't you write he said, why do you want to work with those goddamn rattlesnakes? Why don't you go write about that? He sort of veered between erudite professor and vulgar cowboy. And he says, why do you want to work with those goddamn rattlesnakes? You should go write about that. And on the plane back to California, I thought, he's right. I'm not ready to write about that. I don't know myself remotely well enough to write about this life and death stuff. But I'm going to write a book about snakes that tries to go modestly in that direction. So my snake book starts out with my dinner with Norman MacLean. So in the prologue, Norman MacLean poses the question to me, why snakes? And then I wrote the chapters to my snake book, so there were little essays at the start of each chapter that were about the topic but more personal. And these essays run through the book and they end in an epilogue, which gave my best answer in 1997 to the question, why snakes? When I finished the snake book, by then it was 15 years later, and I was ready to start thinking about that one. So that's how it happened. Sorry, it was such a long story.
I love that story. But why snakes, though?
Yeah.
Can't leave us hanging.
I think I had to admit that it was the deadliness of them. It was the violence, and it was me clumsily, inarticulately, never quite conclusively grappling with having a kid die in my arms and trying to save people with gunshot wounds to their chest and stuff, And when you go out and you watch a rattlesnake strike a rabbit, you can kind of at least shed all that human stuff, and you can confront what is surely naked. It's surely violence.
Yeah,
it is. It's a violent act, but it doesn't have all that other baggage, and so you can just sit there and think about that. Life, death, one life left. All this stuff. So that was it's a little more complicated, but that was the answer to the snake book.
A catharsis of some weird way.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
And both books were cathartic. I mean, there was no doubt that writing snakes, even though I was only sort of tangentially dealing with these things. And in the epilogue of Snakes, I talked only a little bit, only as much as I needed to, and as unsentimentally as I could about some of the experiences I'd had as a young man. And then
by the time you get to Tracks and Shadows, you're a little
And then
bit
I was
more...
ready to take a deep breath and go, okay. And actually, one more thing is that back when I met Norman MacLean and decided I wasn't ready to write it, I was worried I would forget stuff. And so right after word processing came along and keyboards, I wrote a stream of consciousness memoir one summer. I just tried to remember dialogue and smells and sounds and the relatively little emotion that I did feel that I was aware of. And I wrote it all down just without worrying at all about the quality of the prose. And I put it in a spiral notebook and stuck it in a file cabinet. And like literally 10, 15 years later, when I started trying to write Tracks and Shadows, I pulled that out. And I had things in there that I fear I would not have remembered 15 years later.
Yeah, it's like a strange time machine to pull that out.
Yeah.
And I think now gosh, if you traveled 10 years back in time and interviewed yourself, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
There's an interesting idiot there. That's probably what I would say to myself. Wonder what he's going to get into.
Yeah, well, maybe you're going to write a book.
I hope someday.
Have you thought about that?
I have. And I thought about it in much the way that you have thought about it. And kind of like, at what stage in your life are you ready to reflect and introspect? And at what points in your life are you ready to just like study and sift and look through things and learn things? And that's why when I was reading your book, that's what I was thinking of. I'm like, here's a person who's done all these things and is spilling them out, but in such a way that leads to this conclusion, which is informed by all these experiences, And if you would have wrote that book when you were 30, it wouldn't have been as good as it is. And so I think about that as a writer, And writing is so damn painful.
Oh, it's awful.
It's the worst.
It's awful.
I talk to writers on this podcast all the time. It's like, well, what's writing like for you? I'm like, well, it's the worst thing ever.
It's really wonderful too, though.
Oh, it's
highs and lows.
Pain and pain is wonderful in lots of ways, especially when it's like some artistic pain. It's almost like writing is the pain, and writing is what makes it good. So I think about that. I'll write a book one day that maybe meditates on all the things and try to do that, but I'm not there just quite yet.
Yeah,
I don't want to rush it.
Yeah, well, I hope you make it to the end of Tracks and Shadows.
I will. I got 2 chapters left. Yeah. In fact, I read the last chapter first.
You did. See, you know about Pooch the Cowboy.
I know about Pooch the Cowboy. I do.
Yeah.
Well, go pick up Tracks and Shadows. That's just the one that I like the most, but there's a lot of other books by Mr. Harry Greene here that you should go pick up and learn about his life. It's pretty badass.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Harry.
Great talking to you, Ben.
You too.
Yeah. I hope we go for a hike someday.
Oh, we're going to go, with an elk at the end.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We should do that.
Or a rattlesnake.
Well, hopefully an elk.
Yeah.
Maybe. If I was going to encounter a rattlesnake, I'd be comfortable with you there. Like, what do I do now? I'll tell you, I have one rattlesnake story because I lived in Texas and hunted in Texas for 4 years. I was hunting axis deer in the hill country a couple of years ago, and I was sitting. It was during. They don't have a rut, but there was some rutting axis deer around me, and there was this roaring axis deer 100 yards. I got my bow, and I kept working in on him, and he'd be chasing a doe, and working on him, he'd chasing a doe. And I'm like, man, I'm just going to sit down. I'm just going to calm down, sit down. Maybe he'll come walking by. So I sat down just up against this old scrub oak tree and put my feet out. I had snake boots on up to my knees. I sat there, and about 5 minutes go by, and this buck's, I could see him 200 yards away just running in his thick mesquite. And I could see him, and I was like, well, I'm just going to hope that he comes over here. And just about that time, I felt something kind of like touching my hip.
Uh-huh.
And I just reached down to like brush my jacket away. And I looked back down, and there was like a 6-foot rattlesnake that had breached my knee and was crawling over my boot. His rattle was about at my thigh.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, oh, cool.
Yeah.
A snake. Oh, yeah, a snake. And then slowly, as he was like making his way down my boot and up over the foot and down, and then I quickly switched my mind to, oh shit, oh my God, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I just sat there long enough to let him kind of get over my boot, and I ran like a little girl for like 300 yards, and I turned back, and he didn't even.
Yeah.
He just kept on going.
Yeah.
He turned and looked at me kind of like in an annoyed fashion. Like, I wish he would have just chilled out.
Yeah.
But he didn't coil to strike or anything.
Yeah.
He just
Do you happen to remember what month this was?
I want to say it was in June, maybe.
Yeah.
Something like
So that quite possibly, they tend to mate a little later than that, but they also have some spring mating in western diamondbacks. That quite possibly, based on size, it was almost certainly a male.
It was.
And when they can distinguish, I don't actually know whether they can even perceive where a non-receptive female has been. So rattlesnakes generally don't breed every year, the females. It takes them more than 1 year to build up enough fat to make a litter. So only at most every other year, sometimes only every 3 or 4 years, a female is receptive to breed that summer to produce a litter the next summer. So that's their social system. And so because females, if you imagine that the sex ratio is equal, in any one summer, there's a lot more males looking for females than there are receptive females, right? And so when males are on the trail of females, they stop eating. They just sound familiar? So they're just going, right?
Yep.
And so they crawl these long, fairly straight routes. And it turns out if you're looking for a trail and you don't know where it is, a straight line is like the right search strastrategy.
Yeah.
You just cut a direction.
You're going to cut it. Eventually, you'll hit it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that's what they do. And so I've watched them many times. A male rattlesnake during the breeding season is just like crawling about a body length a minute.
Yeah.
Flicking. And I've actually a few times seen one when he encountered a trail, because then everything changes. He starts crawling in this very circuitous, much slower. And if you keep with him, you'll find him. He'll locate a female. So I wouldn't be surprised if that guy, he couldn't have cared less about you.
He could.
You didn't smell like a rabbit or a squirrel. You didn't act threatening, and you weren't a receptive female. So you were just
Thank God.
You were just one more lichenous rock or oak log or whatever.
You feel that when there's a snake on top of you, crawling,
Yeah,
right? There's a little bit of a helplessness feeling, but then you realize like he's got all the power really in this situation.
Yeah. But you know what? If you had been like, say, just a few feet away and you'd tossed a stick or something and he'd snapped into that big exaggerated strike coil and started buzzing like crazy, the big long slow tongue flick as long as you were like, let's say, if you really want to be super careful, 10 feet away, nothing's going to happen.
Nothing.
The rattlesnake you've seen, unless you're standing on it when you see it or putting your hand on it when you see it, is pretty much not dangerous to you anymore. It's the one you haven't seen that could hurt you. Or the one you interfere with.
That's it. The one that you walk up on.
A huge fraction of snake bites in the U.S., not in Senegal or India, but in the U.S., a huge fraction of snake bites are people purposely messing with a snake.
You think snakes have an opinion of us?
I think they just want to avoid us. Yeah, I don't think they.
Much like anything else. Yeah. There's no predatory. I wondered. I was thinking, I wonder if a snake has an opinion of what's going on. Because he looked. I remember looking at him. He's like, he looked pretty annoyed at the situation. Like, well, I'm going probably, like you said, I'm going to find a receptive female, and anything isn't that is annoying to me.
Yeah, we had. We had 50 snakes with radios in them.
Yeah.
And the one we had the most experience with was a female. She was a young adult female when we first put a radio in her, and we watched her for 12 years. So 12 years later, she was a very senior female. And we had, I think it was 569 encounters with her. I wasn't in on all of them, but me and my collaborator. And I think during that 12 years, we had to catch her 3 or 4 more times to change her batteries, basically. But our whole handling protocol was super gentle. So I don't think I ever heard that snake rattle during all the times we captured her, anesthetized her, put her radio in, released her, and so on. And the significance of that is that one time I was looking for her, and I was by myself, and I had the radio antenna, and I had her signal, and it was getting louder and louder, so I knew it was closer and closer. And I was looking ahead, and I'd start walking from different directions, and I'd always get the same vector to the loudest signal. It was pointing at this juniper tree. And I was looking in my binoculars under it, and I couldn't see her. And I finally decided, as improbable as it seemed to me, that she was somehow buried under the duff, under the litter, under the tree. So I took the antenna off and was going to use the cable as a really short distance detector. And I crawled all the way around the juniper tree on my hands and knees, poking the cable at the ground.
Oh.
And nothing. I can't find the goddamn snake. So I finally sit up right against the trunk. It was sort of a big tree with drooping limbs. And I sit up with my head kind of among the limbs. And I literally started daydreaming about a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because it made me think about something called a gumption trap, where you're not making headway because you're making a false assumption about what you're doing. So I was thinking, what is my false assumption? And I had this weird sensation. I tilted my head slightly to the left, and female 21 was sitting on a limb right next to my face. Her head was literally 3, 4, 5 inches from my face. And she didn't so much as flick her tongue. She didn't rattle. She didn't flick her tongue. She didn't bite me. She didn't do anything. And of course, I just very slowly moved away. And when I walked away, she was still sitting there without moving. So I think it's possible. I don't want to overly anthropomorphize this situation, but I think it's certainly reasonable to think that I never taught her to be afraid of me. I'm not saying we were pals. I'm not saying she recognized me.
It's conditioning.
But I think I never taught her to be afraid of me. And I think if every time I'd encountered that snake, I'd pinned her down and picked her up by the head and showed her fangs off to somebody and kind of roughed her up, I think she would have been a much more defensive snake in the presence of whatever me meant to her. And I think I could have ended up getting bitten right in the face, which would have been horrific.
That would have been terrible.
Oh, my God.
But you think if they have those predatory, the molecule you mentioned when they're
the tracker
injecting,
molecule.
So if they got a tracker molecule, if they're using that kind of sophisticated biological markers, they got to know you. They got to understand different things in their environment that are similar and repetitive. They got to know that.
Oh, absolutely.
It only makes sense.
It makes sense. It would be unparsimonious to think otherwise, wouldn't it?
We don't want to be that.
No, we don't want to do that. We don't. Want to do that.
Well, thank you, Harry. Appreciate everything, and let's go mess around with some snakes together.
My pleasure.
I can learn something.
Yeah, I'll get up to Montana sometime. It's one of the few states I've never been in. So
it's wonderful. Get up there. You're not too far away, so come see us.
I will.
All right, Harry.
Take care.
Bye.
I guess I grew up on an older road.
That's it. That's all. Thanks to Harry Greene. Great interview, man. One of my favorites. I think, unlike other recent interviews, I connected with Harry in a lot of things. I really appreciate his views on the outdoors. I really appreciate his experience with snakes and some of the things he taught me there. But just a good dude that I'd want to hang out with as much as possible. So if we can have him on again, there's a whole life's worth of experiences we have yet to unearth with Harry. So hopefully we can do that at some point soon. But thank you to him. Thank you to his wife for letting me borrow him for a while in Colorado State University, for letting me get lost on their campus while I was there. And then also thanks to Cody Gardner for writing in with your not-so-sharp moment. Thanks to everyone that has been filling thc@themeateater.com with a bunch of stuff. Before we go, you should definitely continue to watch the Back 40. If you go to the Meat Eater YouTube channel, themeateater.com, you can watch the Back 40 with Mark Kenyon. Mark Kenyon, we bought a property, 64 acres in Michigan, and Mark Kenyon is working right now as we speak to try to kill a deer on it and also manage it for biodiversity. So it's a fun show. I've been working hard with Mark on it, so I'd appreciate it if you guys went over there and watched that at the Meat Eater YouTube channel or themeateater.com. I really would. And also, another piece of content I work on every week that I really think is great is Remy Warren's Cutting the Distance. Cutting the Distance is a podcast that will make you better at pretty much any hunting tactic, but mostly Western hunting tactics with Remy. Remy does a great job of storytelling. He does a great job of giving tips and tactics, melding that all together in a beautiful gumbo of hunting advice. So go to anywhere you can download podcasts or themeateater.com. Check out Cutting the Distance. Those are my two. If you want to know what I'm working on every week, it's THC and those two things. That's what I spend most of my time doing. So proud of those content projects, proud of Remy and Mark and all their hard work of everybody here at the Meat Eater team. So we're going to see you next week with our next Whiskey and Ethics on baiting. See you then. Bye.
Stay here too long, 'cause I can't go a week without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong. Without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong. Drinking in heaven. Sitting as the boss food starts to grow roots. I'm feeling like an old worn out pair of shoes. Oh, tell me what is it that I should do?
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.